I'd like to welcome you to How to Go Broke, opening a bar. Noah Rothbaum, I'm the CEO and Chief Analyst of Trend Forecasting and Spirits Consultancy, Liquor Intelligence. I'm also the author of the new book, The Art of American Whiskey, A Visual History of the Nation's Most Storied Spirit Through 100 Iconic Labels. So new, I still don't remember the whole title. I'll be signing books this afternoon at 3 p.m. downstairs in the lobby. I'm also the associate editor of the forthcoming The Oxford Companion to Spirits and Cocktails. I'm working with Dave Weindrich, who's the editor. That should hopefully come out in the fall of 2016. Once we're done with all of the Tales business, we can get back to working on that. My first book, The Business of Spirits, How Savvy Marketers, Innovative Distillers, and Entrepreneurs Changed How We Drink, was published in 2007. Also a columnist for the Daily Beast. I've assembled a crack panel of experts who offer a variety of experiences and essential skills to help you plan, open, and run a successful and profitable establishment. We have with us, next to me, is Alan Katz. He's the director of the Boutique Spirits Collection for Southern Wine and Spirits of New York. He's also the co-founder of the New York Distilling Company in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, where he produces Perry's Tot, Navy Strength Gin, Dorothy Parker American Gin, Chief Gowanus, New Netherland Gin, Mr. Katz's Rockin' Rye, and the cocktail that you guys have actually in front of you, please help yourself, no need to wait, is made with Mr. Katz's Rockin' Rye. And also his forthcoming American Rye whiskey. We have one of the rare bottles right in front of us. Next to him is Anthony Caporale. Anthony has been involved in the opening of more than a dozen major restaurants in roles ranging from consultant to general manager to owner, including as the beverage manager for Bobby Flay's Mesa Grill restaurant. In addition, he's the director of beverage studies for the culinary management program at New York City's Institute of Culinary Education. He's also the creator of the off-Broadway show, The Bible, and there will be a performance on Saturday at 3 p.m. if you guys would like to attend. I think it'll be an entertaining way of enjoying Tales of the Cocktail. Next to Anthony, we have Susan Fedroff. Susan has more than 15 years experience in the financial management of food and beverage establishments and a broader background in hospitality trade for the last 25 years. Susan's a partner in the Flatiron Lounge, the Pegu Club, and a co-owner of the Clover Club. Add to that, her new establishment is Leyenda, also in Brooklyn, which is excellent. She's been involved in every aspect of opening a restaurant bar, from raw space, including all financial planning, construction, design, menu planning, and operations. Very glad that she's on the panel. Susan holds a master's of finance and economics from NYU and has a background as a financial and budget analyst in addition to her hospitality experience, so she knows what she's talking about. And next to her is Ryan Malkin, who's an attorney focusing on beverage alcohol law. Prior to starting his own firm, Malkin Law, Ryan was an attorney at Pernod Ricard USA, perhaps a small company, perhaps you've heard of it. He's also a former assistant district attorney in Manhattan. We're gonna take questions at the end, so hold on to them, but obviously write them down. And we'll get right into it. I guess we'll start at the beginning. Maybe Susan, since you've opened the most recent bar, I guess maybe if you could talk a little bit about sort of the planning stage for Leyenda and sort of if that's increased compared to some of the other bars that you guys have opened in the last few years.
Yeah. Hi, good morning. I think Leyenda was like a unicorn project for us because we actually signed the lease in February and we opened May 20th, which is a rarity.
Wow.
But after doing all of the projects that we've done, where we've planned on being open in 12 months, it turned into 18 months, sometimes 2 years. With Leyenda, we really learned in the planning stages to ask all of the right questions. There were no surprises on building out this project because we asked everything that you could possibly ask about. We went in with architects, we checked out the building, we made sure we had all of our permits, our C of O. We knew everything that was going on with this space, so we didn't go into it blind. And as a result, there wasn't too much that was thrown our way that we couldn't handle quickly and diffuse it. I think in the planning process, the most important thing to do is to just really dig into it. I would say before you do anything, at least in the city of New York, go on the DOB website and find out what violations are on that building, because everything affects what you're trying to do. It could hold up getting your liquor license, and the long lead items are the things that'll end up making you, hemorrhage money on a project when you are trying to get the doors open. And just, during that process, I would just ask as many questions as you can, and, before you sign on that lease.
How about for you, Alan, for the shanty? How long was it, the planning stages for that?
Our planning stages, and my unique participation here on the panel, is we have a bar attached to our distillery, but my opening the bar came with experience working in some bars, visiting and being a patron of many bars, but having never opened a bar by myself before. And so for the entirety of our project, it took about 18 months, but we were opening the tandem businesses together of manufacturing and the bar. And for me, I think the most important thing of our aspect in having inexperience in doing so was asking as many people as possible from the construction angle and relations that we have of who has friends at two important agencies that every city has, and that was Department of Environmental Protection and the Buildings Department. And in our case, we had 3 times, because of the unique nature of our space, we had the bold, soon to be called genius determining factor to take over a space that had no utilities when we took it over. And that added some delays, certainly in our construction, but in the long term, we knew it was the building that was best suited for what we wanted to do. But 3 times we had incidents or hurdles that would be very commonplace. When is the city going to turn on the water? When can we get an inspection? Something was at issue with the electric. When can it be inspected again? And in all 3 cases, the simple action of asking as many people as we could who had direct relationships to those agencies aided in us not getting any arms twisted, but putting our paperwork very honestly to the top of the pile, so that those things that could have taken 6 weeks each took 48 hours to get resolved.
Amazing. Well, Susan and I were talking before, Alan and Susan, you've been able to hire some of the most talented bartenders in the industry to work, at your establishment. Susan, sort of an all-star Hall of Fame of bartenders, including Phil Ward and Katie Stipe and Lynette Marrero, and the list goes on and on. And Alan too. You have Nate. It's been a great.
In due credit, Susan and Julie have supplied certainly Nate, our head bartender, and some of our other staff as well.
Well, I guess do you guys have any advice about sort of assembling the right team and hiring people, and sort of Anthony too, obviously, if you want to weigh in, are there certain traits that you look for, or characteristics, or resumes?
I think that just one quick thing that I could speak to is just when you're assembling your core team, your partnership for this business, is to make it as diverse as possible. I know that my skill set was within the background of financials, and so that's really what I handle. And then for like a project like Leanda, it's Julie and Ivy that are assembling that bar team. And we all have a very specific skill set, and I think that because we're not 4 people coming in with the same background, all trying to do the same thing, that's what makes it a successful venture. And I think we've attracted a lot of talent because we've just, I think we've earned a reputation for being fair and not greedy with people that work with us, and nurturing talent and education programs and all of that. But again, I think it's about the diversity of the partnership and making sure you hit every aspect of it.
Just to add to that, it may seem obvious, but I think you have to really know before you set out to build out your space and set up your business, what at the core it is you're trying to promote to a public audience. For years, and probably even at Tales of the Cocktail for years, I would be Natalie dressed in a jacket or tie on a daily basis, certainly at work. And it's been a long time, certainly it's been about 5 years since that's been commonplace for me, even though I'm perfectly comfortable in it, and we not in any promotional material. There's no philosophy that we've written down and keep tucked away somewhere, because our business is really about manufacturing and brick and copper and steel. We have fun having a beer and pounding down a shot, talking about our bar as being a roadhouse cocktail bar. And so with our head bartender, as we developed a core staff, and we've been lucky that even as a 3.5-year-old establishment, we've had very little turnover, that we were able to, as Susan said rightly, diversify the staff, but also go away perhaps from our own comfort zone that wasn't necessarily what you might conjure as Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse, but to say, you know what, there's a certain image and feel to that might be fun, surprising, to add that cocktail element to that environment, and look for people who are equally interested in that overall environment for our business.
Yeah, a couple things building off what Alan said. I think staffing is one of the things that I see most new bar owners get wrong, and I think I tell people it's very common that I'll see them spend 3 to 6 months, maybe 9 months on a project, building the bar out, that kind of thing, and then they'll spend 1 or 2 days hiring their staff, which is kind of insane. I don't know how many of you out there, how many of you have been to a cattle call where they just post, right? Ridiculous. Come ready to work. I love, those are my favorite, right? Come in uniform, and if we hire you, you work that night. Yeah, I can curse, right? That's bullshit. So, your staff is probably the most important element that you have in this business. It is your sales force. And the thing that I think most people in this business get wrong is they don't realize that this is a sales business. You are selling. And I see, I tell bartenders all the time, when they want to open a bar, they want to make the best cocktails in the world. And then guess what? So does the person sitting next to you. And I always tell people, this business is not about making drinks. It's about serving drinks. And if you don't know the difference between that, put another couple shifts in. And the people who serve those drinks are your sales force, and that's your staff. So for me, when I do consulting, and I do a lot of hiring consulting, I build in 2 solid weeks where we do nothing but staffing. And that's before we start training. That's a solid week of interviews, a solid week of follow-up, and then 1 to 2 full weeks of training. And even that is 1 month out of a 9-month project. And I tell people they get very excited about buying rotovaps and ovens and lighting and pictures, and you need to get excited about hiring your staff. That's the most important investment you're going to make. And if you're not good at it, or you haven't done it before, find someone who has. Because if you don't have the right staff, everything else falls apart. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Well, and I think adding to that, Ryan, a lot of people often don't think about, staff beyond bartending and barbacks, but also things like accountants and lawyers and hiring, all of the paperwork. And Ryan, if you want to talk a little bit about kind of the type of, stuff that you will have to run by a lawyer, when you open a bar, it's obviously very important, because if you don't get that right, it has a lot of dire consequences.
The first thing I would say is think about everything from the menu ultimately, and what you want to serve and how you want everything laid out as early in the process as possible, because the application for wherever your bar is at is likely, in New York and Florida and a lot of other states, going to include not only your menu, but the layout, where your refrigerators are going to be, where every single thing's going to be, potentially even your staffing and hiring needs. So your business plan, or however you want to do it, unrelated to even getting money, is laying out from the very, very beginning where you're ultimately going to end up. And then obviously in terms of support services, administrative services, you're going to need, likely, you can do it on your own, but an attorney who's familiar with alcohol beverage laws in the state. Obviously you have to go through the zoning boards, the community boards in most states. So there's a lengthy process, and if you don't understand the process, it could take you a lot longer than if you work with someone who knows it. I have a checklist of things that you need for a bar, and it's 30 things long. Your application could be well over 100 pages once you're done. So thinking about and planning ahead and organizing ahead of time is really important.
Well, obviously, probably a little bit less exciting than making drinks, but or planning your recipes, but no less important. Which brings us to another really fun topic that Tales we spend probably too little time discussing, but really business plans. I know that everybody loves talking about business plans. I do. But obviously it's very important, and a lot of times I think because we're in the bar business, it's kind of like, oh, like it's kind of loosey-goosey. We don't need a business plan. We're not a corporation. We're not, investment bank. Why do we need that? But obviously, it's very important. So I know, Anthony, if you want to talk a little bit about, why somebody opening a bar needs a business plan, and exactly sort of the rough, what it should include.
Yeah, definitely. So, again, I think you're right. Nobody gets excited about business plans. People always come up to me first. I want to open a bar. First thing they give me is their menu, their cocktail menu. They got all the greatest recipes in the world. And that's awesome. So have a party for your friends, because that's what you're ready to do at that point. I'm not kidding, right? So a business plan, a lot of common misperceptions about business plans. I think people who even know that they exist and know that they need one are under the misunderstanding that if they have a great business plan, they're going to be able to magically walk into a room full of angel investors who are then going to fund their project for them. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to happen. Most people who end up doing this are either self-funded, they have a second or third mortgage, or they have rich friends and family. That's the reality of it. Especially for your first venture, you're probably not going to be able to put together a room full of people, present a business plan, and get $1 million. That's not going to happen. Okay, so why do you need a business plan then? It's your roadmap. The most important thing, and the common theme that we've heard even so far, is planning and preparation and knowing where you're going. Right? There's an old saying that, I don't even remember how it goes, but in order to get somewhere, you need to know what the destination is, right? You can't just kind of wander around the room. You're never going to get there. So your business plan is your roadmap. It outlines your goals, and it outlines your plans for achieving those goals. And if the only thing you ever do with your business plan is check it once a week, once a month, see where you are, update it, make sure that your marketing budget and marketing strategy matches your current product offering, make sure that your financial goals are on track. That's one of the most valuable things that you can have. I always tell my students, your business plan should become your standard operating procedures manual, it should become your training manual, and it should become the package that you give all of the contractors that you work with. Because one of the things, I'm sure Susan and Alan can add to this, you're going to be working with a ton of independent contractors, and none of them know what the hell you're doing, and fewer of them care. They want you to cut them a check. If they don't understand your concept, they can't execute it, and then you're going to end up with delays and overages and all kinds of stuff. So you need to know what your concept is. You need to be able to articulate it, and you need to have a package that you can give the contractors, you can give your staff, you can give the people who are going to communicate directly with your customers. Because this is about building a brand, folks. And that's what this is about. This is not about building a bar, it's about building a brand. And if you don't know what the brand is, you can't build it. So the business plan is your roadmap, and it's what's going to keep you on track and make sure that you're headed to where you want to be.
Oh, sorry. Just, I was just going to say, practically speaking, your application is ultimately going to be a business plan, because you have to have photos, you have to have menus, you have to have layouts of the entire interior, you have to have a list of expenses. So you're doing it anyway, so you might as well go the extra step and do what he's saying and make it really an official kind of operating agreement, or not operating agreement, but operating plan, because you're going to have to do it anyway.
I'd say that it's just, even with the different projects that I've had, in the beginning we were writing business plans primarily to gain investors. With this last project, we had somebody already signed on. We still wrote the business plan. Even with our team, we felt like we really knew what we were doing, but it has to be cohesive, and sometimes your idea of what you think the direction is that this is going in is different from your partner. And it's just a really good exercise. And obviously, the pro forma, the financial projections that you have in that business plan, that, to me, that's like the Bible for that business. I mean, I spend more time on that than anything else. And then the written text within the business plan supports that financial projection. And, we keep going back to it. That, when you talk about a roadmap, that's our roadmap. I spend a lot of time building a revenue model. If I'm 4 weeks into a new project and our P&L is off even by 5%, I can find it. I can find it immediately and know exactly what's going on. These are the tools that you need to be able to make informed decisions as your business is growing. And early on, you can correct errors immediately. I mean, like a really quick example, when I first started doing this, I built a revenue model that was broken out by days of the week and then chunks of hours in the evening, so like a happy hour, after dinner, late night. And I had the number of people that I expected to come through the door, the average number of drinks that they were going to have, what those drinks were going to cost. And so in like our first 2 months, we weren't hitting our numbers. We were off by like 10%. And I looked at it, and we were looking at the numbers of people coming in, and it was all there. And so we're like trying to figure out, where is this problem coming from? It took minutes to figure out that the numbers of people coming in were accurate. We needed to put a swing person on the floor Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then we hit our numbers 4 weeks later. That was it. The people were there, but we weren't selling them the number of drinks that we had projected we could do that. We found it in no time at all because it was built into that plan. You have to keep going back to it. Have somebody on your team who understands finances, having an accountant, having, a legal mind on your team. It's incredibly important.
The only thing I'd add, it's a fantastic story, you're right. The only thing I'd add is, if you haven't done it before, it can be a little daunting. You pull up an example online, stock business plan, you say, oh, this doesn't make sense to my business, what aspects pertain, what don't. And I think, as you can all attest to attending conferences like this, there's enough people with goodwill that you can absolutely ask for help, ask for second and third sets of eyes for people that you know and trust in the business to say, what do you think of this? What do you think of the neighborhood where I'm planning on opening a bar? Am I over or under projecting? What are people willing to spend? And if you don't have it, then you got to hang out in restaurants and bars where you're planning to open your business. But for me, I'd written many business plans that frankly never came to fruition, but I had several trusted people, including my parents, who I would send business plans to, just so, because it was worthwhile to send it to people outside of the business also. It's a tense time. You're trying to get something off the ground, where you're trying to raise money, you've got a vision or a passion, and you think, oh my goodness, I have a finite pot of money that once it's gone, I've got to get this doors open. But if you have people that look at it from both in and outside the industry, you're liable to get good, solid questions that you might not have thought of from just a core business perspective, not just a bar or restaurant bar perspective.
I think that's a great point too, because what separates our industry from a lot of industries is that people, are really into helping each other and sort of forwarding, this cocktail movement and getting people to drink spirits and cocktails. And I think really, I remember years ago somebody saying, like, if you ask somebody for help and they don't help you, forget them. Like, move on. Like, somebody else will help you. I mean, whether you're opening a distillery or a bar or whatever you're doing, like, usually you can find somebody, especially at a place like Tales of the Cocktail, who'll be more than willing to sit down, buy them a drink, get them a free drink if it's a party, and they're more than willing to give you advice, because we're all invested in this, and we're all sort of, invested in this movement continuing and even getting better, and sort of investing in other bartenders and distillers.
And the only thing, one last thing I'd add is allow yourself some flexibility. Things will change. Market conditions change. Ingredients that you can source will change. A lot of things that will affect your business will pop up and surprise you. But allow yourself the flexibility, but maintain the discipline to check in on that plan. Whether it's weekly, that's fine. We check ours monthly, and we do a hardcore check-in on a quarterly basis. We actually do a 2-day retreat. In our 3.5-year history, we've done 3 two-day retreats at the start of each fiscal to say, okay, we've got all the numbers from the year. Let's look at it month by month, by quarter, seasonality. What is it that we were doing right? What can we improve? And it's not just for the sake of the business, but for our own maturation, because although our business has different parts, I sort of look at it, Susan, more on your business and how, the example you've set in growing the businesses, that you're nurturing people who can then fill new roles for you if you seek to expand to multiple operations. And that education process has been tremendously valuable for me.
Well, I guess the big elephant in the room that we've sort of danced around but haven't really addressed is the liquor license, which is, I say that in hushed tones because it can be, depending upon the market that you're in, can be probably one of the most difficult tasks that you face, and also sometimes one of the most costly expenses you're going to have. I guess, Ryan, I defer to your legal expertise. how early do you start the liquor license process? Like, what has to be in place, and what are those sort of key steps?
I mean, you start as early as possible because it's probably going to take longer than you might expect. But depending on the state, realistically, it could take between 3 to 6 months at a minimum to get approval, and that's after you submit it to the state and assume that there's no back and forth. Obviously, it goes in the bottom of a pile, and whenever they get there, they get there. Some states are automated, and it takes a little bit shorter of a time. Some states, it's still paper. You have to walk it in, and it takes a lot longer. And the cost can also range drastically. In New Jersey, there's only a finite number of licenses, so you have to buy from somebody who has one. Same with Florida, for the most part. So the license can cost upwards of $150,000 just to be able to get it when you buy it from somebody else. Places like New York, it's roughly $5,000. So, it could be very expensive depending on your state, and you need to start as early as possible. You also need to check the zoning. You also need to check the rules in your state, but usually you can't be within 500 feet of like a school or a church or synagogue or something like that. So there's a lot that needs to go into it, and the more time, the better.
Well, last year we did the sort of first seminar in this series called "How to Go Broke: Opening a Distillery," and Dave Pickerel, who's the former master distiller at Maker's Mark, was on the panel, and he sort of gave the wise advice for people who wanted to start a distillery, and also sort of works for a bar. If you have any flexibility in terms of where you're going to open up your business, it's not a bad idea to check out a couple of different markets and see how easy is it to get a liquor license in this market. What are the laws? Are there any incentives? Some communities are trying to get businesses, or maybe there's less competition in this market versus other markets. So, obviously a lot of people, you don't want to move, but if you have any flexibility, it's sometimes worth just scouting out even a couple of different states. He had worked with a client who had looked at 5 states before settling in Detroit to open up their distillery because it was really advantageous. They're still in business. They're huge in all over Michigan. People carry their products, so it's really have been embraced by the states. So, and it's one of those interesting things.
Yeah, and for those of you who, I'm not sure what the level of experience here, but the liquor laws are not under the federal government. They're state by state. So 50 states, literally 50 sets of liquor laws, and they vary wildly across the country. The first thing I always tell people to do is to go to your state, either SLA, State Liquor Authority, or ABC, Alcohol Beverage Control Board. Go to their website. They all have amazing websites. They're all extremely helpful. The very first thing you should do is go to the website. They all have a facts section, and they have the requirements for getting a license and pertinent laws in plain English. They're wonderful people, and I've opened bars all across the country, and the first phone call I make always is to the State Liquor Authority, and guess what? You almost always will talk to a person. People are intimidated by this. I'm blown away by the number of people that I work with that try and open a bar and never make contact with the state authority. It just blows my mind. I'm not saying you're always going to pick up the phone and get somebody, but eventually you will. They'll answer questions with you. I just spent an hour on the phone with the freaking New York State, of all people. You'd think you'd never get a hold of them. I spent an hour on the phone with one of their head attorneys. Was thrilled to help me. That's their job. So please, make that your first visit. See what the requirements are, because that may stop you in your tracks right there. And it may be a matter of moving 10 miles in one direction. In New York, we have 4 states you can choose from, depending on where you want to be, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and I would just add to that and say you can download the application and the instructions, and there's a checklist. It says, right to premises, landlord identification, 500-foot law statement. So you have all these things that you're going to need ahead of time. So at least if you have in your planning stages and you're looking at spaces, you can even just take the checklist and kind of go in your head and be like, oh, this place works, this doesn't work. And also definitely call the state. They are extremely helpful. And are definitely glad to help you. Yeah,
remember, they make money when you make money. That's literally their job. They actually want you to sell alcohol. They just want you to do it responsibly. The other thing you have to remember is that under the state, you also now have counties, and they can actually modify the liquor laws. They can't loosen them, but they can tighten them up to the point of dry counties where there's no alcohol sales, which you may familiar. And underneath the county, you have cities. They can do the same thing. In New York, we have community boards that can do the same thing, and community boards can just say no more bars on this block. You're done. That's it. Or they can say, yeah, we'll give you a liquor license, but you got to close at 9 p.m. Good luck, right? You need to make that phone call first. So you got to go state, county, city, and then if there's any incorporated levels underneath that, sometimes there's incorporated villages, there may be hamlets. All of them have a say in this, and they can change. In New York State, for example, depending on what county you are in, depends on the closing time of the bar. It's different in Westchester than it is in Manhattan. Same state, right? So you need to understand what those are. You need to make sure that you make that phone call way before you sign your lease, and well before you get your business plan finalized.
And to be honest, I think the more background research that you do, will save you a lot of money, because a lawyer's time, a good liquor lawyer or alcohol attorney, depending on what they like to call themselves, costs a lot. I mean, what is the going rate, Ryan? Is what normally, it's several $100s per hour.
Yeah, we paid $4.25 an hour.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
And
That's
it was
like
worth it.
that's a reasonable rate. But you imagine their billable hours. So the more research that you can do for free on your own, or the less of complications that you have, the cheaper it's going to be for your liquor lawyer to help you.
I'll just put one spin of reality on it. Know your strengths, know your weaknesses. There's a long list through this conversation that you can put bullet points against of all the things you need to do or should do. But very honestly, know when something is not your strongest suit. And if that's not your strongest suit, know as much as you can. It might be in plain English, but it makes no sense to you. I can tell you reading legal documents is not my expertise. At a certain point I say, I don't get this phrase, or I don't understand what the requirement is. And for us, it was very helpful. And actually, I would say, although it is an expense, saved us time and money, because I could focus on hiring staff, a strong suit of mine, design and build out, a strong suit of mine, and said, okay, I know exactly what I want. I'm going to communicate to our liquor attorney, which is what we call them, and let them handle that process. So as all these things are essential, you should have your hands in all of them. You should have as much understanding and awareness of them, but know where you can facilitate things efficiently and where you can, if you will, hand them off and save time and money by hiring experts and professionals to do some of this work for you.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, this all goes back to the planning stage of it, and just asking as many questions as you can ask to as many people as you can get their attention. We can only give you so much information in 90 minutes, but people who are in the industry who are doing what you want to do. Talk to them, ask them a million questions, because the things that are going to save you time down the line and save you money with professional fees that you have to pay. Again, like one example, I knew in the neighborhood I wanted to be in, I started going to those community board meetings a year out. I knew what questions they were going to ask. I knew that the 90-year-old lady that lived on the corner of Baltic and Smith was going to give me shit about being open till 4 a.m. And I knew how to handle that. I knew how to manage the situation. And that's, they hold a lot of power in New York. The community boards, have a very hard line on it, and you have to know what you're stepping into. The first time you go there before, to speak for your license shouldn't be your only experience with the community board. Just be prepared.
And also, I think, how you present yourself and how you're presenting the business. It sort of goes back to the business plan, but obviously, with the community board, I think the more professional that you can be and the more together in terms of your plan and how the business is going to run and sort of the crowd that you're expecting will only help you impress upon them that they should, approve your project, which certainly, even I remember when a small bar, perhaps you've heard of it, called Death and Company opened up. Dave Kaplan had a terrible time with the community board in the East Village. It was really one of those things where, as amazing as Death and Co. is today and how big of an effect it's had on our industry, it almost didn't open. It literally didn't open because people in the East Village objected to the way that it looked. They didn't like, what it was. They, all types of crazy objections, and he basically had to plead his case in person in front of the community board and convince them that he was responsible. And I think, I could be mistaken, for the first couple of years, they had to close earlier, and then only did the community board agree to extend their liquor license to later once they kind of proved that they were responsible. So, these things definitely do happen and can really, be a big factor on your bottom line.
Yeah, and folks, I don't want you to think this is all about New York either, because I know a lot of you are not from the New York area. I opened a bar in North Carolina. There are zoning boards everywhere in the country, and they range from just, we're concerned with how this business area looks, to preservation, landmark authorities, things like that. Yeah, I had the place that I was working with, they wouldn't let me put the signage out that I wanted. And that ends up being a potential deal breaker. If you can't put the signage out that you want to let people know what you're doing, I ended up not taking the space. I mean, you got, and again, you need, if I hadn't made the call to find out who was responsible for improvements to the storefront and what hoops I had to jump through, I could have signed the lease and not known that, right? So it's not just New York, it's everywhere.
Well, and even sometimes that will affect, I've heard that sometimes they'll make a deal where you can have, a liquor license, but you're not allowed to carry certain brands sometimes, even if there are too many other establishments in that area, sometimes for liquor stores. I've heard that. I'm not sure if it's true, but, I guess Alan and Ryan, with your background working with distributors also, let's say you've made it through all the hoops, you have your licenses ready to go, you have the location. How easy is it to start working with the distributors so that you actually have product on your back bar? Do you, is it COD at first? Will they give you credit? How does that work?
Well, I mean, for the most part, you're looking to set up a line of credit, no doubt. You're going to get terms. Every state's got different policies. If you're in Florida, the typical terms might be 10 days. In New York, it's 30 days. It's simple. You reach out.
And the term you mean for payment,
right? For payment, of course. But you're going to get terms. You're going to fill out a credit application. So you want to have good credit. You're going to have probably at least 3 references, including your bank and other business references. And most of them, have agencies or internal operations that are going to follow up on those backgrounds, if you will, to say, okay, this person is worthwhile to give credit to, and then see if you can't, in some ways, develop a relationship directly with those distributors so that you have access to the products that you're interested in.
The only thing I'd add to that is some states have rules where if you don't pay within whatever the stated credit rules are of that state, let's say it's 30 days, then you can be on the blacklist and no distributor can sell to you. So you just need to be mindful of what the payment terms and the rules are of your state so that you don't go past that and you get screwed. You can't buy anything.
And also be aware, folks, I'm sure all of you know this, but you have to buy from a distributor. You can't just be like, oh, well, my distributor's not selling to me, so I'm going to go to a liquor store and pick up some vodka. No good.
Right. Just one last point for that also, and just, with building these relationships with the distributors, and again, in the planning process and your opening financials, if your opening inventory is going to be $20,000, $25,000 for a small place, is that your opening cost, or is it something that you can get a net 30 on and push it into, after you've been open for a little while? That stuff, if you figure it out early on, huge difference. I mean, for like a small project, that swing is your contingency in your financial, management. So.
Is there, talking about the product and pouring stuff, is there kind of, some, bar owners? I was up at the Rochester Cocktail Revival in May. I guess it was over Mother's Day weekend. And I was talking to the organizer who owns, Chuck, who owns a couple of bars up there, and he's talking about average pour cost. Like we got into actually fascinating for me, probably not for a lot of people, but a fascinating conversation about average pour costs. And, that will also vary, whether you're, in Rochester or you're in New York City or you're in Minneapolis, like, is there a kind of formula for figuring out like where your average pour cost should be for spirits?
I mean, I think this depends on your project and your business model. I know for what we do, I think we decided kind of early on, most F&B places like restaurants are a 10% profit margin, and I'm just like, that's not why we're doing this. We're looking to live at a much higher margin than that. And so it really becomes a question of, efficiency. And so we cost everything out. We measure everything that goes out. Everything that goes over that bar, if it's not paid for, it's on a comp check. There's full accountability. Our pour costs are low. I mean, we are all in 21%. That's counting the coasters, the napkins, the garnish, the straws. Just a plain liquor cost is 15% for us. And I mean, that's a place where you can really lose your shirt. If you're not monitoring that regularly, if your inventory isn't on point, you're not doing the costing, that's a place you really got to keep an eye on it. And when you're costing out your menu, you can't just, you might have the most amazing drink in the world on this menu. If it costs you $4.50 to put that drink out, that's it's great. Have it on an eclectic list, but have something on that list that costs you $1.10, and make that your $13 cocktail. So you're like making up the difference. Like, understand how you're costing out your menu. That's a really important part of keeping your costs at an efficient level.
And I think two areas where people often don't look at costs are, one, I was at an interesting talk by Alex Gratania yesterday about non-alcoholic cocktails, which also can be, not only a good idea for many reasons, but also kind of a good idea because they don't contain alcohol. So like the profit margins can be a lot higher. The other thing that sometimes people don't think about are shots that like we pour for other bartenders, for friends. Chuck up in Rochester is saying that it kills his profit margins when his bartenders pour shots of chartreuse for each other, because he's like, don't pour chartreuse, like please don't pour chartreuse because it's so expensive. Like, drink chartreuse in somebody else's bar. Like, if they're gonna pour you a shot, go to your friend's bar, but don't pour it. Find a shot for your staff that I would say that's a lot cheaper than chartreuse. Make that one, whatever it is, find something that you all love that's much rock and rye, Alan's rock and rye, whatever it is, that's a lot cheaper per bottle than something crazy like chartreuse or something else, because that adds up. That's one of those things where, like, where did all the money go? Oh, like we drank it.
Staff drinking
Yeah, or
That's never a good idea, by the way. Anyway, so two things that Susan said that I want to make sure that you guys heard. A profitable, well-run restaurant operates at 10% profit. So I want you to write that down if this is news to you, because that means if you're grossing $1 million in sales and you're doing everything perfectly, you might, if you're lucky, have $100,000 at the end of the year. Folks, there are easier ways to make $100,000. Okay, most people, especially who haven't been in this business, look, oh, they're making $1 million. The owner's got to be walking away with $500,000. No way. And that's if you're Susan and Julie and Alan. Most of the places that I work with, if they're walking away with 3 to 5%, I'm thrilled. All right, that's realistic. So, and the operating margins that you should have for your liquor costs, we shoot for 19 to 21%. And the thing that people forget, which I love that she brought up, really very good at this, as if you didn't know that. She mentioned coasters and napkins. That's called Q factor. All right, so you've got to figure that in, because every time you put a drink out, you're not just putting out what's in the glass, you're putting out everything around the glass, and that can make a big difference. So you got to figure in your product cost and your Q factor.
And talking about that, like in certain states, some of the distributors are allowed to help you with such things. Like, obviously the laws, again, why you sometimes need a very good liquor lawyer. The laws vary from state to state as to what the distributor can provide, but in some states, a distributor will print your menus for you. They'll pay for that. They'll give you coasters. They'll give you, they have budgets for such things, and it's completely legal. But again, you need to figure out whether or not you can accept such things, but that will really help your bottom line, because that you don't have to pay for it yourself, and that's a very fortunate situation.
And you should know what you can ask for, because in all of the states, it's not permissible for a distributor to discriminate from one bar to the other. So that although they may not think to ask you, if you know that you can ask for it, and you can get coasters, napkins, bar mats, napkin cabs, whatever you might want, then you can ask your rep for those things, and then they will technically have to give it to you.
Which actually, I have a question for Alan, if I may. How does a manufacturer view working with the bars? How important is it to you to get menu placements and cocktails and bar facings and all that thing? How much time do you spend on that? What kind of things do you do to
So wearing both hats as we do as manufacturer and bar owner, it's essential, because we're little brands. You've not seen our billboards yet, or our magazine advertisements, or radio or TV ads. It's essential, because these are products that are only going to be seen if they're on cocktail lists. You'll never see the brand otherwise. You might see a bottle, and you may see it, you may not, because there are other things you'll be more familiar with. So for us, in terms of sales, our time is spent cultivating and maintaining relationships with the people that are influential in developing cocktails, purchasing spirits, so that we can build and develop brand recognition. And that goes hand in hand in working with a distributor as well. So I think any distributor, particularly when you're a new business, people are excited about new businesses. It's a new account. They're not sure what the possibilities are. They, again, similar factor, they make money when you make money. And so they're interested in spending some time with you. It's worthwhile maintaining that relationship. You can dig around too, and you can ask people in your neighborhood or people who've got experience, who are the best people to work with at X distributor or Y distributor. You want someone who's going to pay attention to you. And then you should be able to ask them, not outright, what can you get me for free? How can we work on this together? What are the materials? Are there brands that might be willing to support what I'm trying to do in my business that focuses on a particular spirit category or a particular part of the world, or it's got some food theme that might have an applicable context to something that they work on also. And then, again, it really can build into the thematics of your business plan and how you promote the business.
Ooh, and the one thing that we haven't touched upon is also, the distributors or the producers often will even come in and train staff. Sure. Like a lot of the bigger portfolios have programs, whether it's Pernod Ricard's Bar Smarts or Anchor has a bar program. And literally it's great because, you could get somebody like Alan or, another producer or, now almost every market has a craft or boutique distillery. And if you call them and if they have any sense about them, they can come in and give training to your staff.
And
or you
let's
can
just
go to their distillery.
Pile it on to the list of the things that you might want to consider doing. But I would say these things are wonderfully opportunistic. They're wonderfully available. But in my experience, having done this for close to 15 years now from the training side, is that people oftentimes just exhale with relief. You're available for training? Thank goodness. What date are you available? Can you come in at this time? They never ask questions about the details of what you're training on, and it's worth just a few minutes of conversation so that you can relate to them what you're interested in. Obviously, they have an agenda. It could be a good agenda. You don't want them to not come in, but you want to make sure that the points that you need to get across to your team are going to be included. It might be business aspects. It might be how to incorporate these things into cocktails. It might be costing things out, how to cost save when you're shutting down at the end of the night. All of these things have relevance, but don't just, again, exhale with relief. Great, we've got training set up. There's a block of time, and it's allotted, and now I can do something else, and the staff will be trained. It happens, I got to say, it happens 100% of the time in my experience. No one ever asks the follow-up question of, what exactly are you going to say to my staff? What is it that you want to get across? And it's a really valuable and simple question to follow up on. And
again, that's the type of thing where, you ask another bar owner that you trust in your market and say, who's done an amazing training at your bar? Like which brand has a great ambassador or so-and-so who's willing, what did they do? Like, what are the types of things that they, came in and talked? And to be honest, that's how a lot of brands sell their product. Because it's, there are two types of brands, right? There are ones where they sell, huge numbers, right? We're talking millions of cases, right? So everybody knows those brands. And, consumers buy them, bars buy them, everybody buys them. And then there are a lot of brands, and to be honest, a lot of the brands that we know and love and support Tales of the Cocktail are ones that are really on-premise brands. Yeah. And those people have, sometimes those are some of the better brands, and sometimes those people are also more invested in coming in and training and educating, and the ones that really understand things are ones that aren't just gonna shill and do an advertisement about what they're selling, but kind of the broader industry, and they understand that it's an investment. You're also sometimes depending upon your market, may be able to bring in local authors, journalists, other people who are more than willing sometimes to do trainings for staff. Consultants, will also, like Anthony or other ones, you can hire and come in, and again, it's sort of knowing your strengths and weaknesses. I guess we're, sort of coming to the end of our talk, but one of, I think both Alan and Susan brought this up. One of the things that they wanted to include was kind of a funny question. You know, in hindsight, you know, if you could do something differently, and if, you know, obviously there are always different constraints, financial or otherwise, you know, if sort of if you knew what you know now then, what would you change?
I'd be honest, I was thinking about this before I got to New Orleans, and the one thing, and it's going to sound perhaps silly or humorous, is I would add more electric lines. We were building out of space. We didn't take over an existing space. We blow out and this is all modern stuff. I have a bar that's 3.5 years old. Everything should be in spectacular condition. I didn't ask what the grade of copper was going to be used on my plumbing. I didn't ask where the different electric lines were going to end up in my building. And because for us, it ended up, we used a cheaper grade of copper. We're jam-packed 2 out of 7 nights. We're reasonably busy 4 out of 7 nights. We're a little slower at the beginning of the week. We're not pounding anything out. I've had to replace all of the plumbing underneath the bar simply because the acid of citrus has eaten through our plumbing. And the other is that and this is equally more important because the plumbing, fortunately, is not that expensive. But if I had added more electric lines, more fuses, I'd be more efficient from everything from prep when we have pre-shift and people are coming in to make syrups from scratch and everything from that and juicing, et cetera, to if you want to have a private event and they want to bring in live music and they want to plug in their sound system or someone wants to show some sort of other audio visual, it's a little bit more challenging for us because we didn't really take the time to foresee how might this space be used in an additional way than just the daily outlook of a publican bar.
I think that what it took me the first 2 projects to learn that I think I've now done really well with the last few is you have to get over the awkward conversations with your partners with these partnership agreements, and you have to have really difficult discussions about money and all these shitty topics that you don't want to talk about because it's honeymoon phase and everybody really loves each other, and you have to go sit down with somebody who is way smarter than you are in a legal office and have a discussion as if your partnership were going to fall apart in the worst possible way, and protect yourselves. You know, I learned on my first project because I was really nice and we were having so much fun, and then 2 years in, that contract that you never want to have to look at again, we had to pull out of the drawer, you know, and so you just have to get the difficult conversations over with early on in the project and make sure that you're protected with the right team of people on that agreement.
Cool. Well, I guess the caps are passing out now. A little taste of mezcal. Ryan, which one is it? Are we drinking or?
It's Viejo Indecente, and it's launching in the U.S. In just a couple of weeks. So this is the first time anybody's tasting it in the U.S. So enjoy.
All right, and the first cocktail was the Big Iron, which Alan's bartender Nate developed. It's the New York Distilling Company's Rock and Rye, which is flavored with rock candy sugar syrup, Bing cherries, orange peels. Did I leave anything out?
Cinnamon bark.
Cinnamon bark. I always leave out the cinnamon bark. So it's almost like a delicious bottled old-fashioned. And then what you have is literally the difference is that it's missing the bitters, but in what you drank, and the Big Iron has bitters and ice, both Angostura and orange bitters. All right, so it's 2 bitters. So it's kind of it's my favorite way to wake up in the morning. Forget coffee, have a Big Iron. I guess that sort of takes us to the end. I mean, we could be up here probably for 4 days talking about such things, but we wondered if anybody has any questions now. We'll take them. Sure, all the way in the back.
Yeah, I've got a few questions. Sorry. So, Anthony, you guys all New York based, other than Anthony, you've done something outside of New York, everybody else is only open and operated in New York, is that correct?
Ryan is located in Miami, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I've done projects in Hawaii as well,
Cool.
consulting.
I guess that's kind of my lens. You guys, you're not just going to walk in a room of angel investors or whatever, so what's the best practice to gain capital or figure out your capital if it's not a corporation, or if it's not somebody else's capital, basically, how do you fund it yourself, or who do you rely on? Where do you go? What are your outlets for that?
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, especially, I think you can, to be honest, rule out probably a loan usually, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
you're
that's-
not going to go to a bank off the bat unless you have a proven business track record. Then you might be, but you might have a relationship with a bank. When you say either you have the money, but even if you have the money, you might not want to be footing the whole thing yourself. You got to have the guts to go out and sell it. And going all the way back to the business plan conversation, it's not that we had two different business plans, but I would say there was a little bit of our business plan that was the flash part of it. It was who was involved. How can we make this as bright an opportunity as possible? We were putting as realistic numbers when we got down to the hardcore as possible. And we were hopeful that potential investors would ask us about it, because the people that have deep pockets are oftentimes not involved in food and beverage industry. They're from financial industry or some other aspect of life where they've made significant money, and we wanted to be able to educate them as much as possible so that our expectations weren't going to come as a surprise to them. But it's simply about having the guts to go out and sell it. But to me, for us, it was going out and selling it to potential investors who became our shareholders in our business. Other people might have different experiences.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, when I put together a partnership, we all are much more comfortable when everybody comes in with a little something. Everybody's got a little skin in the game.
That's true, too.
And, as much as you can, I realize it's tough with the first project, too. You might be, like, sort of pulling together resources from everyone that you can. But, those silent investors aren't so silent, and so you want to keep it down to a minimum. You don't need 10 different investors. And the thing is, if like Alan said, if you put together a really smart business plan, your financials are strong, they make sense, and you deliver on what you said you were going to deliver on, that investor is going to come back for every project you do after that. So it's, again, planning and just trying to keep it as simple as possible.
100%. I'll give you one other point of reality. Real reality. So this might be the only thing you've ever wanted to do. Your life will not be fulfilled unless you can open the bar of your dreams. I can say this, having opened a bar and distillery, this is my greatest adult fantasy come true. No joke. I well up literally here with a little bit of tears to say this fantasy has come true. With 6 or 7 other business plans that are ripped to shreds, never came to fruition, here it is, it's live and in action. That being said, now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, we wrote 3 different financials, and there's some risk in this. I'm not automatically suggesting it, but we wrote 3 different financials. One was, if we only raise this much, can we drag our knuckles, so to speak, and get the door open and take a greater risk? And then there was a middle range that said, well, okay, we can do some of what we want, but not everything. And then there was the third and says, well, this is what we need to really open the doors the way we wanted to. There's obviously risk involved in taking any but the third scenario. It may be worth it to you. It was worth it to us. We were fortunate enough that over a reasonable amount of time, we raised enough money to get to the third or the highest plateau. But it was important enough to us to get the doors open in some manner that we were willing to say, okay, we'll risk it. And I think Susan made a critical point. You really want skin in the game. Because we could show our investors, hey, we're all putting resources that we have into this project, that we were willing to sort of go it on a slightly lesser level if we had to. To each their own. It may be of value to you.
I want to add one thing that Alan touched on here, because I know that the other elephant in the room is, how much is this freaking going to cost me, right? And that's actually, next year I want to do a whole seminar just on that question. But I want you to think about this. We don't have time to address it today. When you're talking about what I need to raise, and let's say you go 3 different levels, I want you to think about this. If you know that a bar operates at 10% profit margin, and your projections for sales are $1 million a year, let's just say, and that's a lot. What is your profit for a year? $100,000, right? Okay. If you open that bar and spend $1 million to open a bar that's going to gross $1 million a year. On the surface of it, that sounds reasonable. What's your return on investment? How long is it going to take you to pay that back? Is that a good investment? No. So make sure, one, you have accurate sales projections. And you do that by going to comparable bars and sitting there. If you have no other way to do it, sit there and figure out what they're selling. Once you know your accurate sales projections for a year, take 10% of that, multiply it by 3 or 5 if you want a 3-year return on investment or a 5-year return on investment. That's the maximum you should be investing, folks, because if you're investing more than that, it's a hobby. Does that make sense? So it's not a matter of raise as much money as you can and put it in the business. If you're not doing this as a good investment, it's a hobby. And that's fine. I know people who spend $100,000 a year on their hobbies. That is great, and I encourage you to do that. But if you have to do it as a business to pay the rent, make sure that you're setting yourself up for a 3 to 5 year return on investment. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And make sure that you have the lease to support that. You know, if you've got like a shitty 5-year lease, which you should never sign, or a 10-year lease, then you just bought yourself a job, you know? So, I mean, you got to get yourself like a really solid lease. And, you know, and he's right. I mean, when you build out any pro forma, 10%, you know, yes, there are absolutely, I mean, you can do better than that. But, you know, 10% is what you should be planning on, just to be smart and safe and conservative.
So the rule of thumb, what I always tell my students, 30 to 50% of 1 year gross sales is what I recommend the maximum investment is in the project to be safe. Again, do what you want, but for a realistic return on investment time frame, 30 to 50% of 1 year gross sales. And that's steady state. That may not be your first year.
And I'd say that, you know, we've talked about talking to successful bar owners in your area, but you can also learn a lot from bars that have failed. Like, and you know, whether it's, you know, you can get access to the person who ran it and say, loved your bar, what happened? Like, it seemed like you were packed every night and you had great cocktails. Why did you close? You know, and if they're not like too bitter to talk about it, you might actually learn a lot. Or even just thinking about, wow, like that seemed like a really good plan and they were packed. Like, why didn't that work out? And maybe it's the menu, maybe it's the location, maybe it was the lease, maybe who knows. But I mean, that kind of thinking, like, you just will help you develop your own concept. All right, any other questions? Or yeah.
So I work on the architecture and design part of the industry, so I'm not a bartender, but I work with bartenders.
Great.
So my challenge and opportunity is always trying to figure out how I can help people. There are a lot of people, I work in the Seattle market primarily, who are very all about the bootstrap. I don't have enough money, I've got this nut that I have to build this with. We can't afford you. How can I be that person, aside from cutting my fees, because I have to make money too? How do I offer? What's the best thing that I can offer somebody? What did you learn from those professional people? How do I?
One question: Do you what kind of design do you do? Like the behind the bar kind of design? Do you do the whole thing, or?
It depends on the experience of the people we're working with. If somebody knows how they want to set up the bar, the kitchen, great. Otherwise, we have a basic level. We've done enough of them to be dangerous. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Otherwise, it's interiors, it's storefront, it's branding, it's all that.
I mean, I think you could, like law, I think you could make the case that, like, I know bars that have opened and the back bar is terrible. And, like, they find that, like, to the point where bartenders, like, their backs are hurting and they quit because they can't get the bottles, or it's just almost unusable. I mean, I was in London years ago at Salvatore Calabrese's bar at 50 St. James, and he had carte blanche to do his bar. I was there with a bunch of bartenders, and they started freaking out because of his reach-ins. Like, they were all taking photos. Like, they were so excited about how the layout was because he could spend as much money as he wanted. But I think that you could definitely make a case that you would ultimately save people money by, like, you know, designing it well. I mean, I don't know if other people have ideas.
Function over fashion almost, you know, just being really smart about the way you pull those things together. And it's also, you know, back to, you know, one of my original points that I keep sort of bringing home is just the diversity of a team. If you know, I mean, maybe you come in and, you know, as a partner with a small percentage, you know, just, and that's a way for you to build your reputation as well, you know.
complementary to that, you might have someone who's not full-time, but perhaps you have a bar industry professional as a consultant to your business. It might help you market to say, we consult with this person or this group so that we can better design something of efficiency and support for your business, which obviously the sales part of it is your expertise, but you want to show people that you're going to save the money in some fashion.
Sorry. Thanks. 1 second, man. I'm just going to bring you this microphone.
My one question is, do any of you have any experience in purchasing an existing bar and repurposing that, or opening a new bar in an existing space, and any differences that would be versus?
You ever buy a used car?
Yeah, I mean, I've done both. Two of my projects we built out from nothing. One was a shoe store with an occupancy of 4, and we gutted it, and it was an enormously expensive project. And I swore I was never going to do that again. I did it 3 times, actually. But this last project was turnkey. I mean, we walked into a place that failed, and we paid some key money, and we asked 100 questions up front, and we knew exactly what we were stepping into, and we opened on budget with that project because it was, it was small and it was manageable, and it was just literally a redesign. So I would say it's certainly an easier route than what has been my experience, but speak to the previous tenants, look into violations on the building. Like, those are the places where you're going to lose your shirt on something like that. Like, why did the place that was there before fail? What were the problems? And just make sure you're not stepping into like some sort of a, Bermuda Triangle thing, because, there's some unbelievable sump pump issue that nobody will talk about. I had that happen once too.
And keep in mind also, usually licenses do not transfer, despite what the previous owner will tell you.
And a transfer is not much easier than a new license, honestly. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you can, speak to that, but I've had just as much issue with transferring a license. I did that once, and getting new licenses 3 times. It was the same process, and it took just as long.
Well, thank you all for your insights today. It's really helpful. Wondering if you could talk a little bit about after the doors open, should we actually manage to get there, and what are those considerations like? For the first 6 months, I realized that there's a runway that we would have to actually be successful, and that's dependent on capital. But what are some of the sort of key things to consider, especially with, you might get a lot of traffic or customers in the first couple weeks or months, but maybe not. Maybe it trails back. And just what does that look like, and what could you address?
For me, it would be common sense for any business. It's got to be hands-on and full attention, and the more you open, the more challenging it is. But it's just, you've set this plan up. It may automatically come to fruition. It usually doesn't, but it might be good. And you say it's constant occasion to say, what is it that we expected? What's different? Maybe you don't want to change anything. The plan, again, is flexible. Maybe something is different, but it provides a different opportunity that's unexpected. So it's about you as the leader and the owner making those critical decisions, but understanding every aspect of the business. And as Susan described, who's coming in, what part of the shift it is, where the profit centers are. Some people might find it boring. I find it fascinating and fun. Those are your customers. It's a people business. It may be completely different types of subsets of consumers that are coming in at different parts. Maybe there's things you can do to enhance that. I think the one thing that I recognize, because there is again, the reality part is it's very stressful. You're dealing with human beings, and you also have a staff that's new to you, they're new to each other, and they're new to the business that you want to operate. And so you've got to instill, I think, when you first open, continuous confidence and support in them. It could be a social opportunity to say, hey, let's all, I don't know, if you're only open at night, have lunch together. Oftentimes, depending on the size of your business, the different parts of your staff might have never met each other because someone's working Tuesday, Friday, Saturday, someone else is just working Wednesday, Sunday day, whatever it is. Give them an opportunity to know each other because the likelihood is they're going to call each other to cover shifts when they go on vacation or someone's out sick or they have an emergency. Do the best you can and the most you can to foster that sense of a small business family, because I think it gets paid back in spades by support and goodwill.
And just adding to that, I think the other thing is sometimes, they see stuff that you don't see. So that, like, your staff is like, you know what, like, we're killing it selling beer. Like, we should stock more beer, or X or Y special was great, or so-and-so came in and they wanted this. And, like, I was able to do it for them, and then suddenly the whole bar is ordering that cocktail or that drink. And maybe it's time to put that drink on the menu, or to, look at the, sometimes the profit margins of items that aren't cocktails. Maybe it's wine, maybe it's beer, maybe it's soda. Like,
That being said, it's your frickin' business. So keep an eye on them also. And I'm not joking. You got to keep an eye on it, because this is a group of strangers coming together to start something new. So take into every consideration. The support's there, but it's your business at the end of the day. And trust yourself most of all.
I think an important thing as well is, if everything's moving along very well and you've got money in the bank, just because it's sitting there doesn't mean that you should be returning capital immediately. We always talk to investors and let them know, don't expect to see anything inside of a year. It's just safer to keep that money in the business. And like Alan said, don't have the blinders on. Like, keep your eyes on the business. Talk to the staff, talk to the customers. They're seeing things that you may not be seeing, and reinvest in the business. If there is something that you didn't do right at the first pass, change it. If it's going to make things more efficient and help you bring more money in the doors, and just keep that nest egg in there, and just make sure when you're seeking out investors that they know that they're not going to see a check, in the first 3 months, the first 6 months. It's really unlikely. It's safer for the business to keep it in there so you can make the changes you need to make.
we have time for one last question.
Just what you guys know, how you guys opened anything in Texas, you cannot buy from a distributor in Texas. You have to buy from a liquor store. And then if anything costs $1 by TABC, they cannot give it to you.
You got to split the tax now. Consumer gets part.
Yes,
you
sir.
get part.
Yeah,
Texas is an
it's
anomaly.
ton of different laws.
One more question.
Hi, I'm from Colorado, Denver. I was just gonna ask if you can talk more about break-even point. Like, every day is different, and maybe it's more for season. But what is the break-even? What do you include in that formula?
I'm sorry, and the break-even point on costing, or
On your cost of
for the whole project, or just for one thing specifically?
for your daily operations.
A break-even point. I'm sorry, I'm not.
So.
You mean like what do we need to be making on a daily basis?
Exactly.
To, like,
How
make
many
it worth
staff do
it?
you need to have
Got it.
on Monday versus Friday?
Right. Well, we build out, again, when I build out my revenue model, I sort of build it out, by the day and by chunks of hours in the day. And so we know what our expectation is for a Monday versus a Saturday. And then, staffing and everything else, expenses are different on the day to day. So a break-even point. I mean, we're looking at a similar profit margin on the daily basis. I would just, in the beginning of a project, I would just pay attention to it and just see where you're hitting. If you're hitting all of your numbers, on each day, and Monday is going to be different from a Saturday in terms of staffing, and just paying attention to if everybody's coming in the way you thought they would.
And you want to separate your expenses. You have your operating expenses, and you have your expenses that are your startup costs. You've got equipment that's going to depreciate in value. It's useful for yourself to run the business, but also to help your investors understand how the business is operating and functioning, that you separate those things out so that you can show hopefully your growth and your revenue and your profitability, but that you have these separate line item costs, whether, again, it's your equipment, your alcohol, things of that nature, that you can delineate and explain to yourself and to your investors.
Yeah, your P&L.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so for those who may not be clear, there's fixed costs and there's variable costs, right? This is where this becomes tricky. Your fixed costs are things like rent, things that don't change. Your variable costs are things like your labor. So as you increase staff, you're going to increase your operating costs. If your sales don't meet that, you could end up losing money, right? And I think that's where there's actually a formula. We're not going to cover it today, but there's a formula called the break-even formula. You should be able to Google it, and it will allow you to plug in all of your fixed and variable costs and put them against projected sales and let you know what your sales need to be in order to cover a certain amount of fixed plus variable expenses. Okay, and you can Google that.
Again, thank you for all your assistance. I have one quick question. How much of a rainy day fund do you need using a $1 million revenue model with a 30 to 50% upfront cost? And then more importantly, as you go forward, you got to reinvest in your business to keep fresh. So of that rainy day fund, how much you split to either a fresh upstart or maintenance costs, or just to give us an outline of how much additional funds you actually do need under that $1 million model.
So I always recommend, and again, it depends on what your cash flow is, but I can tell you that the number one reason that I see, well, probably not the number, a big common reason that I see a lot of businesses that would otherwise succeed fail is because they're undercapitalized. They overspend during the build out, they open their doors with no money in the bank, and that means you can't get through bumps. So I recommend 2 to 4 weeks of emergency funds, and that's just strict operating costs. Whatever your operating costs are for a week, 2 to 4 times that. More than that starts to actually become irresponsible because you should be investing in your business. You don't want a lot of money tied up in the bank that you could be using to grow your business, but you need some. And then what was the other? Reinvest, right. So the reason why I said a 10-year return on investment is not a good investment, because after 3 to 5 years in our business and in most businesses, you will have to make additional capital reinvestments, major reinvestments. Things like walk-in coolers are going to go. Your carpets are going to need to be redone. You're going to have a large portion of your initial investment. You're going to have to raise that money again somehow or have it and put it back in the business. So if you haven't paid yourself back in 3 to 5 years, you ain't paying yourself back. It's just not going to happen, right? So one, I wouldn't touch the rainy day fund for reinvestment. But you should be building what I call the Golden Gate Bridge Fund, which is there's ongoing improvements that should continually be happening in your business, so that you shouldn't just be faced with a $100,000 bill one day. You will. Your air conditioning system's going to die in July. It's going to happen, and I'm telling you, it's happened to me twice. So you're going to need that money. But what I always recommend is that you have a maintenance plan where part of your operating expenses are covering this preventative ongoing maintenance, and then know in 3 years you're going to have to redo all the carpeting. You're going to have to. So you better start saving for that.
Right. You build that into your financial projections. I mean, you should know if you have a 10-year or 15-year project that you're projecting out, year 5, you're switching out a bunch of equipment, AC units. Right. I mean, just like have that cost in there. So if you're moving along and maybe you're lucky enough to be doing like 15%, it's going to be 11, 12% in year 5.
And having the flexibility in your plan is going to help you realize, even in the first 2 or 3 years, where things are going to break down, what your monthly maintenance costs might be, and then you readjust your business plan. We had to do that several times. You're going to have to have someone, your ice machine's in the wrong spot and mold builds up or something happens of that nature. You're going to learn those things and then readjust to account for them.
Right. In terms of a rainy day fund, too, I mean, I know with one of our projects, we go into it knowing if anything ever were to happen, like water main break on the street or something, we have to shut down, we have to pay our staff and we have to pay rent. So we've always got 2 payrolls and a rent check in the bank, at all times.
Well, I think we ran out of time. I'd like to thank, obviously, all of you guys for coming out today. The caps were awesome. Thank you, Samuel, and your team. All the Tales of the Cocktail staff. So I hope you guys found this interesting. The panelists will be around for a couple of minutes if you have any other questions. Anthony is doing his Bible show on Saturday at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, Saturday, 3 o'clock, the Bible. We brought it from New York, off-Broadway show, musical comedy on the history of cocktails and spirits at Le Petit Theater. You get 3 drinks with it. Come see it. It's awesome.
And I'll be doing a book signing today at 3 o'clock. You all have a coaster about my new book. But thank you so much for all coming out, and have a great tale.
Thank you.